Acting Associate Minister for Congregational Care here at First Parish in Concord. Hello and welcome. We are a member of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we believe in love. We covenant to transform and to grow spiritually and ethically as we adapt to a changing world. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life. In this congregation, we affirm that Black lives matter as we embrace our commonalities and our differences. We embrace our commonalities and our differences with love, curiosity, and respect. We are glad you are here. If you're visiting us this morning, welcome. Online, feel free to use the chat to say hi to our chat host, and in person, we invite you to later stop by the welcome table and say hello. I have a couple of brief announcements before we begin worship this morning. First of all, I am so excited to introduce our guest worship leader who is visiting us today, the Reverend Mary Margaret Earle. Reverend Earle has served as the Executive Director and Senior Minister of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry for 10 years. In this ministry, she strengthens connections between UUs and the Roxbury neighborhood, where UUUM operates. She is a past president of the Board of Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. She's the recipient of the Heroes of Faith Award from the Rhode Island State Council of Churches for her interfaith work, and also received a Courage of Conscience Award from the Peace Abbey in Sherborne, Massachusetts. She is a longtime vegan committed to showing up for non-human animals. Once again, welcome, Reverend Earle. Religious education this morning will consist of a trip to Westward Orchards for some apple picking. Join other First Parish kids and their families at 10 a.m. or later. No advance registration needed. And yes, if you do decide to head over after worship, it's likely that there will absolutely still be a group there. So please refer to your parish bulletin if you'd like to learn more. Today and every Sunday, you'll find a table with soul work resources near the entrance to our sanctuary, so that is back that way. Please help yourself to sewing circles, coloring supplies, clipboards, and pipe cleaners for creating. There is also plenty of wiggle room in the parlor downstairs where kids can play with toys, and our service is live streamed. Following the service, we would love to have you join our worship sharing circle, which is a small group conversation about the service theme that's usually in the Brooks Room and online. Coffee hour, which is an informal way to connect and learn more about what's going on at church. You can also stay on Zoom and just mingle with others. One of the people you might mingle with today is our governing board rep today, who is Cece King. Cece, yes, she's given a wave just now. Cece will be available after the service to answer any questions you might have. And really after the service at 3 o'clock today, our welcoming circle will be forming. So this is a social event. Everyone's welcome. You can expect fellowship, friendship, and refreshments. I think Liz is here to, again, answer any questions you might have about that. Liz just gave a wave a moment ago. And we can all answer this final question that I have together, and that is, are we ready to sing? Yes, wonderful. Let us join our voices in song with our opening hymn, number 126, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing.
Sing my Thank you. I read that the insect kingdom is collapsing, that the dense eastern woods have been beaten back and defeated. The lawns, endless seas of lawn, are sprayed and pressed into obedience, all real buzzing, bursting, impertinent life, stilled into a stretch of green carpet. The bulldozers clear the trees and fill in the ponds, and the frogs fall silent. Lights along the highway, lights in backyards, lights everywhere, blind nighttime scavengers, confuse migrating birds. The moths seek the moon and exhaust themselves at street lamps. Fireflies flicker out. I read that the living world is flickering out. And so, I rise in the morning, I fill the bird bath with fresh water. I rise in the morning and take a slender shovel and make space for a handful of goldenrod. I let the milkweed grow and open and surprise me with her purple flowers, her glorious blossoms, when once I did not even know that milkweed eventually blooms if you let her. Yesterday, I watched a swallowtail butterfly dance on the bee balm. There is no way to describe it except as a dance of joy. I read that maybe the world will collapse. I rise in the morning, and like the leaf that curls at the edge from scream into song, I plant something, a handful of goldenrod. I do sing. This is how I save myself. This is how we save ourselves. We sing. We plant something. We love something. We rise in the morning and we begin again. Come, let us worship together.
Before we light our chalice this morning, I'd like to invite Sarah Ballard, who's on her way up already, to help us honor the occasion of Thanksgiving in Transylvania.
Good morning. 31 years ago, First Parish began a deeply meaningful partnership with the Unitarian congregation in Seke Karastur, Transylvania in Romania. Many of us have traveled there and received amazing hospitality, and we've brought a number of their parishioners here to visit Concord. Today is the day that the Transylvanian Unitarians, who are ethnic Hungarians, celebrate their Thanksgiving. So I light this chalice today in honor and in gratitude for our strong partnership and the friendships that have grown because of it.
Please join me in our unison response. O flame of our faith, open our hearts and fill our bodies and souls with persistent strength. Enliven our spirits and engage us deeply in this life of ours, this sacred, essential moment now.
I got the button thing now. Our reading is excerpts from the book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather McGee. The American landscape was once graced with resplendent swimming pools, some big enough to hold thousands of swimmers at a time. In the 1920s, towns and cities tried to outdo one another by building the most elaborate pools. In the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration put people to work building hundreds more. By World War II, the country's 2,000 pools were glittering symbols of a new commitment by local officials to the quality of life for their residents, allowing tens of thousands of people to socialize together for free. By the 1950s, the fight to integrate America's prized public swimming pools would demonstrate the limits of white commitment to public good. In Montgomery, Alabama, the Oak Park Pool was the grandest one for miles, the crown jewel of the Parks Department that also included a zoo, a community center, and a dozen other public parks. Dorothy Moore was a white teenage lifeguard when a federal court deemed that the town's segregated recreation was unconstitutional. Suddenly, Black children would be able to wade into the deep end with white children at the Oak Park Pool. At the rec center, Black elders would get chairs at the card tables. The reaction of the city council was swift. By January 1st, 1959, the Parks Department would be no more. The council decided to drain the pool rather than to share it with their Black neighbors. Of course, the decision meant that white families lost a public resource as well. It was miserable, Mrs. Moore told a reporter 5 decades later. Uncomprehending white children cried as the city contractors poured dirt in the pool, paved it over, and seeded it with grass that was green by the time summer came along again. To defy desegregation, Montgomery would go on to close every single public park and padlock the doors of the community center. It even sold off the animals in the zoo. The entire public park system would stay closed for over a decade, and even after it reopened, they never rebuilt the pool. Today, we don't even notice the absence of the grand pools in our communities. Where grass grows over former sites, there are no plaques to tell the story of how racism drained the pool. But the spirit that drained these public goods lives on. The impulse now manifests in subtler fashion, more often in a pool of public resources than a literal one. So ends our reading. Good morning. It is lovely to be back in Concord again, a congregation that has been such a good and important partner in the work of the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry in Roxbury. I want to thank all those who helped welcome me this morning, Beth and Reverend Elizabeth and the worship and music team. Thank you. And I want to thank the help that our delegates par excellence did in planning for our visit, Leslie Fisher and Rebecca Winborn. They are bridge builders between Concord and the UU Urban Ministry, and they help us connect one to another, and I'm grateful for all that they do. This morning, I'm also pleased to be joined by colleagues from the UU Urban Ministry, Vinnie Miles and Maggie Paula. They're sitting back there, and they're going to be available after the service to answer any questions and share more about our work. First Parish Concord is one of about 45 Unitarian Universalist congregations around Greater Boston that are connected to our work as members. And the urban ministry was founded about 200 years ago by a Unitarian minister in order to collectively work for social justice in Boston. And so you play an important role in how we see our work in Roxbury, where we work across race and place to dismantle racism and to work for racial, social, and economic justice. You have supported us in many ways. We have good friends like Janet Donovan and her late husband, Tony Rodriguez, who served on the board of the urban ministry, who've supported our programs, including our domestic violence shelter and our community building work in Roxbury. Friends like Sue Beck and Ed Kane and Marty Wallace, who've invested in our growing after-school and summer program for Boston high school students. And I want to always appreciate the work that you support, that Loretta Ho-Sherblum does in Funderburg Scholars, which supports students after they graduate from high school and are in college. And many of you have been important in helping us restore our iconic Roxbury Meeting House. Beth was on the original committee that envisioned transforming this former church space into an event venue to serve and celebrate Roxbury. And I know that there were some people who once upon a time joined Beth in singing in that space when there was no heat and lots of peeling plaster. Raise your hand if you ever shivered inside First Church Roxbury. It's different now. And we're completing that restoration right now. And friends here like Stan Griffith and Ann Schaffler, Rebecca Winborn, Gib Metcalf, Alec Walker, Caitlin Selly, Ted Bain, and Lee Delacour, Janet and Tony, all have helped us complete this work. And I want to thank you all for that. And I hope that in the year ahead, you'll come in for a historic tour or a lecture by historian Byron Rushing, or maybe to sing again. We'll see. So when I come to visit congregations, I really value being able to reflect on the ways that we work together. And this year, my heart feels especially full because I'm reflecting on 10 years, the anniversary of my 10 years of service at the urban ministry. And this past summer, I went hiking in the Canadian Rockies, and it was a chance to reflect and take stock of my tenure as I climbed up some pretty steep elevation, adjusting to this awkward day pack, taking in the stunning views of glaciers and azure blue water. It wasn't easy going up, and I bruised my toes coming down, but it was the most wondrous trip. And as I went, I thought of how it was like the work that we all do together for justice. It goes bit by bit, sometimes hard and awkward and uncomfortable, and with so many gifts along the way. When I arrived in Roxbury in November of 2014, it became clear quickly that our work was more than the programs that we had. There was this core question underneath it, which was, how would we address racism in Greater Boston? We were an historically white-led organization in the heart of Boston's historic African-American community. And we were encircled by suburban, mostly white congregations who are reaching out to us to figure out how to be part of making change. I was gripped by the challenge and the potential, and how much I had to learn to get my arms around all of it. But before I could do that, I was called on to preach in pulpits like this. I brought no expertise my first season in the pulpit, no profound message. I brought questions. What did it mean to be a white-led organization in Roxbury? How would we forge real relationships across difference? How did we make change that really matters? And I began very simply, listening, learning, and following. In these 10 years, the police officers who killed Michael Brown were not indicted, sparking the Black Lives Matter movement. We witnessed the election of 2016 and the killing of George Floyd. White people were shaken out of a collective slumber. And the more that I peered into our country's past to understand racism reach, the deeper the well became. I learned about health and wealth and educational disparities that make the Black people live poorer and die sooner than white people. There's a 23-year difference in life expectancy between Roxbury and Whiteback Bay, just 1 mile away. And the well goes deeper. I learned about the racism baked into structures that birth those statistics, the prison, healthcare, and food systems. African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the rate of white people. Only half of African Americans have private health insurance versus 75% of white people. And 22% of Black people in the United States experience food insecurity, twice the rate of white people. And the well goes deeper. These systems are all rooted in enslavement. I learned how the police system grew out of slave patrols, how founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson were themselves enslavers whose economic well-being was secured through bondage, how the prison system replaced enslavement as Blacks charged with petty crime were assigned to hard labor in prison camps. I learned that we cannot disentangle modern educational, housing, and economic systems from this history. Racism isn't a fistful of solvable problems. It's foundational. And to move forward in any meaningful way on our nation and region's problems, we need to face it. This summer, as I was preparing for my hike and reflection in the Rockies, I read a book that you heard an excerpt from by researcher Heather McGee, The Sum of Us: What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. McGee began her research after the 2016 election, when many of us were asking, why did people not act and vote in their own self-interest? Do you remember that question? Percolating, right? I see a lot of nodding heads. She looked at the racism that showed itself in that election and in our nation's political turmoil. Her thesis is this: our country's ongoing struggle for meaningful healthcare reform, for positive economic change, even for investment in infrastructure like roadways, our struggle to achieve collective good despite our abundant wealth and resources can be traced to enslavement. White people, McGee writes, have been conditioned to believe in a zero-sum equation, that if people of color gain, white people lose. And the stronger a person's racial resentment, the likelier to reject policies and investments that benefit all of us, including them. She asserts that etched deeply into white psyche is a value that is placed on whiteness. And when White people see black people in the swimming pool, they'd rather not have a pool than to be in it with them and erase the status confirmed by whiteness. And it's that deep-seated and historic shaping of white psyche that billionaire titans and political tacticians leverage with racist dog whistles to keep us separated and to maintain their power and control. It especially harms people of color that cannot be overstated, but it also doesn't serve any of us, except for very few at the top. She writes, quote, "Racism works against non-wealthy white Americans. It lowers their support for government action that could help them economically out of a zero-sum fear that it could help the racialized undeserving as well," end quote. She draws a through line showing how this zero-sum thinking has collapsed unions that could advocate for all workers, powered disinvestment of public services like higher education. When more students of color began attending college, she writes, public funding began drying up. College students of color 40 years ago were just 1 in 6. Now they're nearing half. Parallel to that rise in BIPOC students, we've cut student funding. And in the past 30 years, public college tuition has almost tripled. She posits that it's why states like Texas refuse Medicare expansion, refusing what's basically free federal funding. That would mean that all rural Texans would have better access to hospitals. The basis of the refusal is the fear that expanding public health care would draw more people of color. Black people suffer the most from racism, but the whole human family is harmed. Solidarity, she says, is the answer. Solidarity is the answer. She quotes a longtime activist. If we didn't have these sharp divisions based on race, we could make enormous progress in terms of making sure that people are not hurting as badly as they are or are deprived of what clearly are the necessities of life. And I would like to think it was possible if we have a social sense of solidarity, end quote. And she continues, quote, "Over the years that I have sought answers to why a fairer economy is elusive, it has become clear to me that how white people understand what's right and wrong about our diverse nation, who belongs and who deserves, is determining our collective course. This is the crux of it," she says. Can we swim together in the same pool or not? It's a political question, yes, and ones with economic ramifications, but at its core, it's a moral question, end quote. And it is a question for us as people of faith. I no longer believe that we can, in a meaningful way, fix social problems without dealing with the history of enslavement and racism's inheritance. Not in fighting for climate change or doing anti-hunger work. Racism cannot be separated from the rest of our social justice commitments. It is part and parcel of everything. And that means that we must build connection and solidarity and also do it in Greater Boston. In our segregated world, that can seem daunting. But as people of faith, let us not be daunted. We are simply called to begin. We are called to do what we can in as many ways that we can for as long as we can. This is our necessary promise. After 10 years at the urban ministry, I still bring to your pulpit no more expertise than when I began. But what has grown is my conviction that building relationships across race is foundational for all of our justice work. And I come really with the same strategies as the year I arrived. To build real connections, those of us who are white need to listen and to learn and to follow. At the urban ministry, we listen to the community of Roxbury to guide us forward. In partnership with the Roxbury Historical Society, we began research into the history of enslavement by the congregation of First Church Roxbury, whose church and campus we inherited and inhabit. We published a report citing the names of 58 enslaved persons owned by First Church Roxbury congregants with even the first minister and enslaver, and presented it at a packed gathering in Roxbury and invited community members to guide us forward from there. For the past year, folks from the community have charted our course, seeking to learn more about the lives, the details of those named in the report, and to try to track their genealogy to find descendants living in Roxbury today. We are right now beginning that phase of our historic interrogation. When we name today's health and wealth disparities, it may seem that the urgency is confronting the racial justice that's showing up and happening right now. And yes, that is important. But the Black community tells us that this also matters. Historic truth-telling to make the past visible and deeply honoring the lives of those who are so dishonored by our religious ancestors. This has urgency too. And our work is to listen to how the community calls us forward. And we learn. We learn through every conversation and every encounter. For the past 5 years, we've held a series of lectures which you have sponsored called Community Conversations, when we invite BIPOC leaders to speak to challenges facing the Black community in Boston. They've spoken on gentrification and displacement, educational inequity, the racial wealth gap, poor health outcomes. We learn for an ever-deepening understanding of the past and the present. We've built a tours program that is led by local community members, highlighting the history of the community that we stand in. These tours tells the story of public art in Nubian Square, how it grew out of work of graffiti artists that were targeted by the city, and how even recently the Black Lives Matter mural that was painted on the main Nubian Square road was paved over with no discussion with the artists. Young people in our after-school program design their own tours of the neighborhood, highlighting what matters most to them about their community. And they share these tours with visiting Unitarian Universalist youth from around the country. Young people share history and hope with other young people. And we follow. Our work in partnership has deepened over the past 10 years. When the NAACP asked us to fill a bus to go to an action in Washington, D.C., UUs filled the bus and went to D.C. As the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute serves those impacted by violence in the city, we stand behind them, inviting congregations to join the Mother's Day Walk for Peace in Boston, which I know that you, like Margie, are so involved with. When City Life, Vida Urbana, asks us to stuff envelopes, we stuff envelopes. We have begun circles of support around organizations like Dee Dee's Cry, which addresses mental health and suicide in the Black community, inviting congregants to listen and ask what is wanted and needed, and doing that, just that. And that's something that Rebecca Winborn is helping us with. We build solidarity by showing up again and again and again in the spirit of listening and learning. And in these encounters, we are blessed with the ripening fruit of relationship. These are the gifts on our necessary journey for justice. When you enter the doors at the urban ministry, you'll see on the entry wall a quote by Aboriginal activist Lila Watson. It says, "If you are here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come Because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. These words resonate as a spiritual truth, and we can feel it. But there's also a very concrete truth here, too, that the sum of us reminds us of. The truth that until we grapple with the history of enslavement and racism and bridge our divide and commit to working in solidarity, we will not be free, any of us, from all that ails us. We need to work together. On my last long hike in the Canadian Rockies this summer, we climbed up Larch Valley to Sentinel Pass, steadily making a 2,500 feet elevation gain to a stunning view, and then we began our descent. And as we descended, we came upon startled hikers who were warning that a grizzly bear was along the trail. She was in a state of what was called hyperphagia, which is a trance-like focus on eating enough calories for the upcoming winter. Our hike leaders reminded us what is called for when we face grave danger on the trail. Make noise, people, they told us, and stick together. And so we held close, and we began singing. And we sang until we were safely through and the trail ended. That is what gets us through the hard and dangerous days ahead. Let us sing loudly, reach out to the whole human family, and stick together. Amen.
Here we are, sharing this time and this space. Let us breathe. Once again, we have come together to offer one another that spark of warmth in each of our hearts, that spark that grows bright in recognition of another nearby. Sharing our big truths with one another makes possible the act of witness and reminds us that we are not alone. Week after week, we show up, we sing, we stick together. We continue the journey in companionship. We remind one another to breathe, to listen, and to notice. This is how we invite joy and honor sorrow, creating space for all the energies that move through our lives. It is how we awaken to each new moment, saying, "This too." It is one of the reasons we are grateful for the time, the space, and the companionship to which we have shown up, ready, with willing hearts and open minds. Today, we hold in our thoughts Nancy Johnson and Jim Reynolds. They are delighted to announce the engagement of Nancy's son, Colin Theron, to Teresa Harvey. The wedding will be celebrated on October 12th in a service officiated by Jim Sherblum. Many blessings for this new chapter of their story. We also hold up Paula Adelson, whose longtime friend, Dr. Mark Bloomberg, passed away last night after 10 months in a coma. Paula, we hold you in our hearts. Bradley Hubbard Nelson shared the news that his father, Charles Rex Hubbard, passed away in Duxbury on September 9th at the age of 95. Like Bradley, Rex was a physicist who had a happy life mostly in New York with his wife Libby, who died in 2022. Let us hold Brad and his two brothers in prayer. And we hold Allison Ailey, who has been mourning the loss of her mother earlier this summer. This week she is gathering in remembrance with family and friends in Maine, where she and her brother will release her mother's ashes into Lanigan Bay from the family rowboat. May Allison and her brother find comfort and peace. May the circle of calm hold all of us and embrace all who are part of our gathering, joining us as visitors, sharing our online space. May our circle hold all that we carried in with us today. Blessed be this moment, this breath, this practice. Into this space we create with our presence, I invite each and all of you to share the names and sacred concerns that you are carrying today, either by typing them into the chat or saying them aloud in the space you are in. We acknowledge and hold in our hearts all of the intentions and prayers, spoken and unspoken among us. We embrace all those who have yet to find a place to call their spiritual home. May they find love, belonging, and peace. Our prayer continues with words adapted from those of Sarah Eileen Lawal. Spirit of life and love, in the silence, in the stillness, we hear and feel the call of our own heart, its tender dreams, its sorrows, and its triumphs. In the silence, in the stillness, we hear whispers of days gone by, of dreams still becoming, the promise of the future we celebrate together. We celebrate together our individual journeys and dreams and our collective ones, knowing the journey is so much richer with others to share in it. In the name of all that is holy, we pray. Amen. This morning's offering will be joyfully shared with Outdoor Church. Outdoor Church is an ecumenical Christian church for homeless and street-involved people in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Outdoor Church, TOC, ministers to people who are unhoused in the Central, Harvard, and Porter Square areas. It holds a Sunday morning outdoor worship service in Porter Square and delivers food, clothing, and other necessities on the streets on Sundays, Saturdays, and Thursdays. Please give as generously as you can.
In our closing words, I again call on the words of Aboriginal activist Lila Watson. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together, and may it be so, and amen. Please join me in our closing hymn, 1018, Come and Go With Me to That Land.
Please join us in our unison benediction. Go out into the world in peace, have courage, hold on to what is good, return to